Welcome to Novel Ideas. I'm Carolyn Luck, your host, and here with us today we have a very special guest. Her name is Christina Blake. She's one of our youngest authors. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you.
And we're so happy to have you with us. You actually published your first book, Sapphire and Planet Zero, before you graduated from high school, which is pretty amazing. Christina has also completed her first year of college at Stony Brook University, where she's majoring in health sciences and creative writing. Creative writing's your minor. We're going to talk about that. So why don't you first tell us a little bit about where you come from and what other things you like to do besides write and study?
Yes, so I'm from Natick, Massachusetts, and growing up I attended Christian schools, Catholic school, and for high school I attended an all-girls school called Dana Hall, and I just graduated from there, so now I'm at Stony Brook University, and I'm really happy to be there. And growing up, I always did a lot of extracurricular activities, but my favorite one was definitely ice skating. I started when I was 12 years old, and when I reached high school, I started competing in competitions, and that was such a wonderful experience. It really grew me, and I learned a lot from my experiences in the competitions there. And I even started working at the ice rink. I taught babies how to skate, and I was an ice monitor. I handed out skates. I was just there all the time.
Ice rink.
Yes, I lived there.
That sounds like a pretty far place from Planet Zero.
Yes, it definitely is.
So what did you read when you were growing up?
My favorite books were definitely Harry Potter, that series, and The Hunger Games, Divergent. I love dystopian books. I love the idea of going to another planet and just exploring what our universe simply can't. And that's the beauty of writing books like that in different worlds.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've certainly done a great job creating this other world in your book, that's for sure. Now, how did you, as you were in school, how did you know you wanted to write? Were you always good in English classes, and did you read all of the necessary genres to get through school?
It actually started when I was really young. My sister, Melissa, she took me to the library. Every weekend we had this ritual, and she'd drive me every weekend. And there was a deal though. Every time that we went, I wanted to take out a movie. But in order for me to take out that movie, I'd have to take out a book. So with every movie I took out, say I wanted 3, I have to take out 3 books as well. And so in order for me to come back to the library to repeat the process, I have to finish all the books that I took out. And so that is what drove me. That motivation is what drove my passion for reading. I discovered that I really loved the books that I took out, and I love the plot line, I love the characters. I fell in love with reading, and that drove me to want to write books just like that. I wanted to inspire the same feeling in children to achieve the same experiences that I felt as well.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I have a friend who says that writers do 2 things. Writers write and writers read.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
You're a prime example sitting right here. So you started on this book when was it this book, or did you start writing other things or short stories? Or?
So I started this book when I was 12, and it's actually such an interesting story. It actually started from an assignment from school to write a short story from a set of vocabulary words. And when I finished the short story, I said to myself, I actually want to continue this. So I continued it. I didn't expect it to turn into a whole novel. And I just wanted to see where the characters would go, and I wanted to keep the same universe of Planet Zero.
Were there any particular vocabulary words that sort of got this started? Would you remember?
You know, one of them was segregation.
Ah.
I do remember that, yes.
Oh, yes. Very, very interesting, very
yes.
interesting. So we're going to really take a lot of time to visit all of the parts of this book. When you write, do you have a particular place you like to write?
Actually, my favorite place to write is my room because it's very comforting to me. I love finding comfort in my everyday surroundings, and that's what gets me into the best mood to write. I'm inspired by that. And even sometimes when I'm looking at something a different way, say a mirror, it depends on how I approach that. If my mindset is a little different that day, I could see, it could tell me something totally different than what I usually see from it, depending on that particular day. And so it's surprising. You never know what you're going to do that day. You never know what you're going to write.
So your writing process, if you don't plan things out, or do you, or to what extent was this book, did you know how it was going to end when you started it?
So when I started Sapphire and Planet Zero, I did not have any idea where it was going to take me. But all I did know is that I wanted it to be about a girl who had to save the world from darkness, and it was connected to her own planet and a different planet, which is Planet Zero. But once I started the story, I discovered where I wanted it to go as I wrote it, and that was very, how do I say this? I felt very liberated doing so. I felt very liberated and free writing as I wrote and discovering it as I go. But today, I approach things a very different way, which is very intriguing.
Yeah.
I have a whole story structure. I have a master map on all the chapters in the book, and I plan everything out to the detail. And that I only do because it's just easier that way when I'm developing the plot later on, so I don't have to be filling in lots of plot holes and making everything flow the way it's supposed to be. So it's just a matter of making it more practical, but I see the benefits of both ways. One way is very liberating, the other way is just practical in terms of editing, but I definitely recommend both.
Yeah, it's very interesting because some authors, when Hank Philippi Ryan was here, and she said, I'm absolutely a pantser. I fly by the seat of my pants, and I have no clue how the story is going to end.
Yes.
I just sit down and start, and I write my quota of words a day, and that's it.
Yes.
And it just comes out the way it comes out. Well, a number of us have decided she's an absolute genius.
It is. It's so
being able to do
smart.
that.
Yes.
And because I write from past experience, my worlds are sort of there, and I just have to describe them.
Yes.
But you mentioned mirror.
Yes.
I took a class one time, and the instructor said, when you get stuck, just get up and move around and act out the character. And so I put a mirror in my office. And I too have a cozy place where I like to write. And when I get stuck, I stand up and look in the mirror and imitate the character. And it's almost scary because the character can all of a sudden take on a life of his own.
That is so true.
But it's really a lot of fun writing that way. So your characters are amazing.
Thank you.
They're easy to relate to. Which one's your favorite?
My favorite one is definitely Sapphire. I myself relate to her, and I understand what she's going through, and I feel like for a lot of children reading this and young adults, they will definitely relate to the situation she's put in. And I tried my best to make the situations very everyday to relate to children growing up in certain situations. And so even though it's such a out of this world book, I put relatable things in there that
definitely
children would understand.
Yeah. Well, particularly too, I just felt like what teenager hasn't experienced this?
Yes.
What teenager hasn't felt this way at some point in time?
The struggles.
And then some of the characters you very tactfully created, like Jesse, and and I sort of was thinking, oh, Jesse and Ari are these friends, and you've got this girlfriend-boyfriend kind of typical thing going on. And for some reason initially, I kept thinking, there's something about Jesse. And then all of a sudden this event happens that makes him so necessary to the story.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, of course he was there.
Yes. He drove the story.
Yeah. Yes.
He drove the story.
Well, that ended up being Sapphire's motivation. For jumping into this crazy thing she gets herself into.
Yes. And what's so ironic is that in the beginning, she had a love-hate relationship with Jesse.
Yeah.
Because Jesse, Sapphire, and Arya, they all grew up together, and they were very close-knit friends at first, but as Jesse and Arya began to date, that all changed.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Arya began to drift away, and that caused Sapphire to resent Jesse. But Jesse also represented what she couldn't have anymore, which was Luke. And that is what really drove Sapphire away from Jesse so much. But that all, she has a revelation later on, and so that's definitely something.
But all of these little nuances of things that intertwine are part of what makes this so believable and so real that it's just really, really nice.
Yes.
As a writer, what do you think is the best piece of advice anyone's given you?
Don't give up. Don't give up, because this industry is so hard and it's long. The best thing to do is just be patient. That's going to get you a long way. You can't control what happens during your writing journey, but you can control how you react to it.
Very good advice. Very good advice.
And also another piece of advice is don't be afraid to move around the furniture. Just move around whatever you want to do in your writing. And if you don't like it, you can always put it back. There's no saying that you can't put it back to how it was before. It's always best to try new things, and you never know what will click.
Oh, how true, how true. I had a writing instructor one time that said, and don't be afraid to kill your darlings. And I had created this beautiful character of this mother in a story. She was a teacher's mom, and I just loved her. And when the main character meets her, it just was just the neatest scene in this old, partly worn down antebellum house. And my editor took one look at this and she said, this just doesn't move the story along. It bogs it down. Kill your darlings. So you kind of do that sometimes, but anyway, she'll come back. She's still in my computer. So my goodness, we're just about out of time for the first part of the show. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back and delve more into Sapphire and Planet Zero. So thank you so much. Welcome back to Novel Ideas. We're here with Christina Blake, and we're talking about her book, Sapphire and Planet Zero. It's her first book, which was finished and published before she finished high school. So Christina, do you want to tell us what this book is about?
So Sapphire and Planet Zero is about a 16-year-old girl named Sapphire who saves the world from darkness and humanity from extinction with the help of her charming ex-boyfriend and humorous talking cat, Toby.
Yes, well, Toby is quite a character.
Yes, yes.
In fact, there are a lot of really awesome characters in this book. But I always find it interesting how characters get their names.
Yes.
And a lot of times it's sort of a hint and a clue about some other things about the character. So tell us where Sapphire's name came from.
This is actually such a funny story. So I struggled to name the protagonist of this story. And then one day it just came to me. I wanted to have a personal connection to the story. So my birthstone is actually a sapphire. And because I was born in September and I'm a Libra, and I thought it would be a little nice touch to have a personal connection to me in the book.
Oh, that's amazing. That's really, really neat.
Thank you.
Well, it's such the perfect name for her, especially because of the color of her eyes.
And especially because it's such a magical...
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yes, it adds a certain amount of magic, which sort of ties you into that. Now, I have a confession to make. I'm not really a big fan of fantasy. And so I first got this book and I thought, well, give it a shot. You can read anything. And I got up to the first couple chapters, you sort of set the tone and you find out who the people are. And you meet the grandma, who I'm going to come back to. But when I got to chapter 3, I just have to read this section in the beginning of chapter 3, because this totally grabbed me into the book, and there was no way I was going to stop reading it. After I found out about this is about Toby and Sapphire, and they're in Sapphire's bedroom. So it's interesting how you mentioned earlier where you like to write. What? I staggered back, my heart pumping harder than ever now. Toby's eyes were wide and alert. I know you're confused now, but you have to remain calm. I can explain exactly what's happening. My eyes scanned the room to see if anyone else was here. To my luck, there was no one. I turned back to him. What are you? How can you talk? This isn't real. You can't be real. My thoughts, and thus my words, were all over the place. It felt like my head was spinning. Am I hallucinating? This is a cat I'm talking to? How could it possibly make sense? That cat is talking to me, I thought. No, Sapphire, I am real. You aren't losing your mind. Toby's voice was stern as he jumped off the bureau. He seemed very concerned, his fur wrinkling where his eyebrows were. He began to walk quickly toward me. And that was just genius writing in my book.
Thank you.
Because it so captured me into what was going on here. And just, it was just a little tiny baby step into this fantasy world, but it was just enough to grab me. You just took my hand and said, come on, you're following me. So it was just very, very nice. And that's how I just couldn't wait to finish the book. I didn't put it down after that. Now, what I'd like to go into next is one of the big issues in this book really is identity. And Sapphire goes through this real identity crisis. And it's kind of tied to both worlds. So you want to tell us a bit more about this identity and how she sort of falls into this, and it's part of her mission too.
Yes, so Sapphire struggles to discover who she really is, and before she thought she was just a normal teenager, she's biracial, and that's what she knew all of her life. But then when she discovered that she's actually half human, half squeala as well, this just turns her whole entire world upside down. And she struggles to accept who she is, which is definitely an issue that can relate to many people, not even just children, but adults as well. And I put Sapphire through this situation because I want to give others hope that even though they don't know exactly who they are right now, that you don't have to have it all figured out right then and there. We're all still figuring it out, and it's okay. That's the main message. It's okay to still be figuring it out. And it takes, I purposely made it so that Sapphire has to go through many events before she accepts who she is, because nobody accepts who they are right away. Especially just like how she couldn't accept that the cat was talking right away. A lot of people have doubts about themselves. And so I want to make sure that Sapphire came off as real as possible in that way.
Yes, yeah, and I think that it sort of tends to start in those teenage years and when people are trying to fit in.
Yes.
And it's, particularly in this world today, it is so impossible to try and fit in, but also to figure out what your own identity is. And then people too often, or at least in my generation, would choose a career and they would identify themselves by that career.
Yes.
And some of us have wandered through numerous careers and positions, and even at my age, sometimes I sit back and say, well, let's see, who am I today?
Yes.
And I go to my writing desk, and then I go off and I do some history stuff, and then I go off and I do some mathy stuff, and it's just, it makes life so much richer and so much fuller when you're open to changing your identity or seeing, it sort of variously moves along in different ways.
That is so true.
Yeah. So I think the other thing that I really loved was how authentic this book comes out. And especially for fantasy, I don't know that I've read, and of course I haven't read much fantasy, but this book is so authentic. And I particularly love the section where Sapphire is talking with her parents. And it instantly brought me back to my kids being in the living room and discussions we've had.
Yes.
So if you'd like to read that little section
Of
for
course.
us, I think that's particularly nice.
Yes. So this is in chapter 5. Leaning back, Dad took a sneaky sip of my hot chocolate. Don't let Grandma fill your head with all of that garbage. Trust me, I actually don't believe any of this. I think it's imaginary too, but I'm just asking in case any of this rings a bell. Grandma was serious. I met Mom's eyes. And you aren't who you think you are. You're a Squila, this creature from another planet in another dimension, and so is Grandma. Even though you look human, you aren't. And since Dad is human, that makes me half human, half Squila. Sapphire, don't you think I would have noticed if I wasn't human? Mom's grin slipped from her face, replaced with concern. Maybe she thought I was crazy. Ugh, but that's just the point. You wouldn't notice because you look like you're human, I said. Toby told me how the insides of Squila are different from humans, so I'm unsure why you and I both failed to notice the crystals running through our veins. Sapphire, did you just say that Toby told you? As in, he could talk? Dad asked, raising an eyebrow. Toby was sitting on the armchair, watching us. Yes, he can talk, I stated, growing more annoyed. My legs sprung up. With motive, I walked over to him. Toby, tell them that everything I'm saying is true. Nothing. He just looked up at me, tilting his head innocently. Toby, come on, say something, I urged. My patience was decreasing, especially since he was the source of the information I was now telling my parents. Nothing. Sapphire, Mom said softly. I could hear in her voice how frightened she was that I was taking this seriously.
I just think that is brilliant. That's so nice.
Thank you.
Toby is more than just a cat, and he becomes such a full-fledged character that at times you almost forget that he's a cat.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah. So as we're talking about characters, tell us a few things about the grandma.
So Grandma Annabelle, she has always been very close to Sapphire growing up, and so it made perfect sense for me to have her be the motherly kind of guide for her to enter Planet Zero and tell her all of the tips on what to do when she gets there, and just explain and clarify some things for her. And so when something drastic happens in the book, it just makes it all more it hits home harder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, at one point, when Grandma falls behind and you don't know what happens to her,
yes.
I almost panicked.
Yes.
I mean, I was thinking, oh no, what's going to happen? What happened to Grandma? Mm-hmm. So, but you did a nice tying up the loose ends, shall we say, with that one. It was very good.
Thank you.
Now, another character in this book is Thaddeus. Mm-hmm. And of course, we need a really, really strong, horrific antagonist. So
yes.
Tell us what he's like.
So Thaddeus, he actually has a backstory with Toby before he turned evil. And this backstory is what makes him into who he is today when Sapphire meets him. So Thaddeus wasn't always evil, and I think that's very important to show the change that a person can go through. This could very well be real life too, because not everybody just was born with these intentions. It was always like you've gone through something that brings you into what you are today. And Thaddeus puts Sapphire and her ex-boyfriend and Toby through a lot of trials when they get to Planet Zero. And he does this because he wants to reverse the prophecy. He doesn't want it to come true because he wants all the power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he comes off like this really power-hungry person.
Yes.
And in some ways, I could relate to real people like that.
Yes.
And I went, oh my goodness, it's such a great depiction and symbolic of so much that we actually know about the world here on Earth, and yet it's all happening in Planet Zero, so it's safe.
Yes, yes, yes.
So that's great. So you want to tell us what's next? You have another book in the making.
So there's definitely going to be a sequel to Sapphire and Planet Zero, but I haven't gotten the chance to get too far into it because I'm actually working on a separate series through a writing program I'm in. And although I can't share too much about it right now, I can tell you that it is a young adult book that is fantasy romance in a whole different universe separate from Sapphire and Planet Zero.
Oh.
And I'm excited to see where it takes us.
Oh, that's amazing. Absolutely great.
Thank you.
Well, I must say we are so fortunate to have this program here at Access Framingham where we can celebrate local authors. And Christina here is just a person really worth celebrating. I'm so happy that we've been able to have you here on the show and to talk about your first book and all of the depth that's behind this fantasy novel. And we'd like for you to tell the authors how they can get a hold of this book. I mean, not the viewers, how they can get a hold of this book.
Sapphire and Planet Zero is available on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles online. And that is where you can find it.
Okay. Well, I hope that you as audience and viewers have an opportunity to read this book. It's really great. And I thank you so much for joining us. I thank the staff here at Access Framingham for making this such a comfortable and wonderful place to be. And that's it for Novel Ideas for today, and we'll see you next time.